Coming up on this week's show, a Pong RPG game.
Atari opened their own casino.
And we get some amazing stories from Psygnosis, Bullfrog and EA with Graham Bell.
This week's show is brought to you by Retro Gamer Magazine, the essential guide to classic games.
Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 219, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
Now, for the first time ever, we're not in the same room. We're recording this week's show remotely. This does feel a little bit weird already, I've got to say, guys.
It is strange, remote retro hour. And you know, I've actually contracted the virus, so I can't be in the same room as you guys. But don't worry, I have recovered.
Ravi's already thrashed Corona.
Yeah,
he's completed it, mate.
So let's just get a little picture of where you guys are then. Joe, no, you're at your kitchen table.
Yeah, so
during the show.
So this is kind of normal for me because I've been working from home for the last 2 weeks anyway, from my kitchen table. As well as my laptop, I've got a nice expensive mic, which Dan sent to me in the post. So it's a little bit weird, but it's kind of cool at the same time.
And to be fair, Joe normally does the show just in his pants anyway. So
it doesn't make a difference to me anyway.
And Ravi, you're in your study at home?
Yeah, I'm in my study surrounded by retro equipment. I've got a medium wave radio and a vinyl player here.
We hope the show is going to go all right. It's a little bit new for us doing it remotely, but I hope you'll excuse any differences in sound quality or anything like that. Obviously, it's only temporary until we can all get back together, which hopefully won't be too long. But look, the show's going to be just as good as always. We've got an incredible guest coming up this week. Now, on the Retro Hour podcast, we like to bring you stories of video game companies and games that we grew up playing. And I couldn't name 3 bigger companies in the world of video games than Psygnosis, Bullfrog and EA.
So this week I'm going to be interviewing Graham Bell. Now, Graham Bell is fantastic. He's a video game artist and designer, and he created a lot of promotional stuff for the PlayStation, you know, magazine covers, retail store stuff, but then he went and joined Psygnosis and Bullfrog. Now, those were huge companies, but they kind of died during the PlayStation period. They had a really good start, so we talk about what happened and, you know, if there were any cancelled games, any really cool cancelled projects.
So this is going to be a good one. Graham Bell is going to be our guest on the show in around 20 minutes from now. Now, before we get into the news stories this week, I mean, we actually recorded a few shows back-to-back before lockdown, so we've got a fair bit of catching up to do actually this week. So we'll update you on everything that's been happening in the world of retro gaming very soon. But before we do that, if you are maybe killing a bit of time at home at the moment, maybe doing the homeschooling thing with the kids, I mean, I don't know about you guys, I think, when was the last time you left the house? I think my missus has been out for about 2 weeks now.
I've actually been going for a walk every day around lunchtime, but I literally just walk around the block, which takes half an hour. But that's literally all I'm doing.
I'm walking around the garden in circles. That's my exercise.
You don't need to mow the lawn, you just walk it down.
Yeah.
Well, obviously at the moment, everyone's looking for a bit of entertainment and stuff to take your mind off everything that's going on. And of course, we want to give a huge thank you to the essential guide to classic gaming, our very good friends at Retro Gamer Magazine, who are back on board this week. Now, I'm sure anyone that listens to our podcast will have read Retro Gamer before. But if you haven't, obviously, it's the only high street magazine dedicated to all aspects of retro gaming. And every month, they bring you exclusive access to classic developers, giving you behind-the-scenes stories, and also covering classic machines and their games libraries revisited, getting expert insight in there as well, and revisiting all those games that you grew up playing and uncovering fascinating new facts as well. Now, the current issue is all about the most brutal video games console war ever, Sega versus Nintendo.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I've got a copy here, and, you know, they've got a head-to-head comparison, which I'm actually really love, because you remember the games on Sega used to be a bit more violent, and there may be, like, not as much blood on the SNES version, but the SNES version might have been a bit faster. You know, there's a lot of differences. So they've got comparisons with the games here, T2 Arcade, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter 2, but they've also got about the really kind of controversial advertising campaigns, and this comes from both camps. You know, here's one that talks about it's a Game Boy advert, and it says, "Why did the hedgehog cross the road to get to Super Mario Land 2?" And on the other side, you've got the Mega Drive Echo, the dolphin, being advertised here, and it said, "Do it all with Echo. Weed, speed, and blow."
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Sega always did seem a lot more edgy, didn't they? And they always kind of put Nintendo down. Like, you know, Mario was like, you know, he was a fat, overweight plumber who moved slowly. Then Sonic came along and he had all this attitude and everything. And I was talking to a friend about this a couple of weeks ago, the fact that I know obviously we've got like PlayStation, Switch and Xbox today, but it doesn't feel anything like the Playground Wars that we used to have back in the 90s.
I think because everything's so similar these days, they've all got very, very similar, specs and stuff. Whereas back in the day, it was completely different, and it was very rare that you got the exact same. You never got the exact same game, the exact same experience on both consoles, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The titles are like pretty much the same on both at the moment. You're right.
Yeah, whereas back then it were different games. The Aladdin game came out; it was 2 different games. So I do miss that. So reading reading Retro Gamer magazine about it and stuff just brings back those amazing memories.
They've also got a huge article here, which is the history of Animal Crossing as well. And they're still making Animal Crossing games, and oh my God, this is fantastic. Anybody who's a fan of that series needs to check this out.
And they talk about skid marks as well.
Oh, yeah.
That was
amazing.
So if you want to get hold of the magazine that will give you everything you need to know about classic games, Retro Gamer magazine, their spring sale is actually on right now with our good friends of Future Publishing. Now, we always get you the best offers here on the Retro Hour podcast. So what about this? We want to give you 5 issues of Retro Gamer magazine for just £5. Now, normally that would be 25 quid if you bought it from the shop. We want to give you 5 copies for just a £5. And there are loads of other magazines you can choose from as well, including official PlayStation, Edge, PC Gamer, all 5 for £5. Now, all you've got to do to claim this offer, do it right now while it's on. We get so many people contacting us a few months down the line going, oh, I missed it. So listen, do this right now. myfavouritemagazines.co.uk/spring 209. So that's myfavouritemagazines.co.uk/spring 209. And if you need that link again, it will be in our show notes. Thanks to our good friends at Retro Gamer, the essential guide to classic games.
And you don't need to go out to the shops to get it as well. It's just going to get delivered straight to your door.
Absolutely. So if you need something to keep you entertained during lockdown, definitely worth a read. Retro Gamer is always a good read, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
Now, speaking of not going out, of course, most of the events, well, pretty much all the events that we had coming up over the next 6 months have been postponed. I know we talked about Retro Spill Messen, Play Expo Manchester has obviously now been postponed, and Flashback 2020. I think it's fair to say that probably all the events that were planned over the next few months are not going to be going ahead now.
Hopefully, these events can pick up again and people can feel confident about going to video game events and going to places like that.
Yeah, and of course, we'll keep you up to date with any developments there. And it's been a bit of a sad week, actually, for a really good friend of ours, because anyone that listens to our podcast, we always get compliments about how nice our logo is and our artwork and that kind of thing. And that's all thanks to one guy, the extremely talented Paul Kitching. Now, Paul's done our graphics and animations and everything since day one.
Yeah, he's done a lot of graphics, actually. He's done graphics for probably the whole retro gaming community. He's done a lot of stuff free for events. And the RetroCon Greenford one he did as well. He's done a hell of a lot of logos and really nice stuff.
Yeah, and if you ever watch movies like Viva Amiga, you'll see all his incredible 3D artwork in there that he's done. Really good guy, but obviously he had a bit of sad news recently when his mother passed away. And obviously at the moment with everything going on, times are pretty hard for everybody. So there is a bit of a fundraiser going on right now. So we're asking, if you can, we know that times are hard for everybody, but if you can dig deep, help Paul overcome the trauma and the burden of obviously having to pay the funeral bill as well, which is coming up on April the 14th. So there's actually a little donation page on Facebook running right now. So if you've enjoyed the Retro Hour, then, we'd appreciate if everyone can get involved in this and just donate what you can to help Paul out during this difficult time. He's a top guy, Paul, isn't he?
He's kind of one of the Retro Hour background staff that you never really hear about, but you see his work everywhere.
Yeah, so if you want to find out how you donate to that, I'll put it. It's actually set up by David Pleasance, the former Commodore UK MD. So if you want to check that out, I'll put that in our show notes along with all the other stories we talk about this week at theretrohour.com. Now, let's get into this week's news. And this actually kind of follows on quite nicely from last week's show when I was talking to Al Alcorn, of course, the father of Pong. I never thought I'd see the day when Pong was made into an RPG game, though.
Yeah, so Atari are teaming up with a British development company called Checkered Ink to bring us Pong Quest, which just looks absolutely insane. I was watching the trailer for it this morning. So far, we've only got the minute-long trailer. Yeah, essentially, they've turned the Pong paddles into an RPG game, and it just looks absolutely insane. It plays like, a 16-bit era RPG, and it's got over 50 special Pong ball upgrades. And it just looks absolutely insane that they've built this huge game out of Pong.
It's pretty cool. They've changed the paddles into little customizable characters.
Yeah,
where
so
you can pick clothes and kind of different styles. It's amazing.
yeah, so the pong paddles are the characters, and then the pong balls are like your upgrades and like your magic spells and stuff like that. And like, I really want to get my hands on this, and it's coming. It is going to be out on Xbox One, PlayStation 4, Switch, and PC coming this spring. We've not got a release date yet, but I'm definitely going to be playing that as soon as it comes out.
I love the way they've described the character as you'll be cast into the role of a brave young paddle.
And this is official Atari as well.
Yeah, it's coming officially from Atari as well, yeah.
So if you want to get hold of that is, I mean, Pong's been remade and reimagined so many times over the years, but making it into a role-playing game, I think that is something none of us saw coming.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a new one on me.
So if you want to get hold of that, we'll keep an eye on that. And of course, when we get a release date, we'll let you know about it. I always love it when classic games that were released on, systems back in the day, they kind of get lost, get uncovered. Now, it turns out there is a game I'm sure you'll be extremely excited about, boys, that's now been uncovered for the Sega Master System. And this is a traffic safety game.
Oh, God.
So this game is called Traffic Safety, and there's not a lot of information about it, but from what I understand, it's like a kind of like a game that helps you pass your driving test in Japan. Right. From what I understand, and there was only ever made 200 to 300 cartridges of it, which are kind of like, when you go to do like your driving test, they were there like to help you or something.
Like the driving theory kind of
thing. Yeah, like your driving theory test kind of thing. And it never kind of took off, unfortunately. But in October 2019, one of the cartridges surfaced on Yahoo Auctions, which is like the bigger one in Japan. They do use eBay, but Yahoo Auctions is like their big auction site. And a company called the MPO Game Preservation Society managed to actually get a hold of it. They managed to win the auction in October, and they've recently dumped the ROM online for us all to play. So it's like one of these like holy grail Master System games that nobody's ever heard of.
Well, this looks crazy. I'm watching some footage at the moment, and there's like lots of kids gathered around playing it. So maybe I'm thinking it might be a bit like kind of, tips on how to cross the road and how cars behave correctly and stuff. And I think like we got the Green Cross Code when we were kids. They got a Nintendo game.
Well, okay. So yeah, I'm not watched the video till now, so I'm just watching it now. And yeah, so it's less theory and it's more, like traffic safety for children then.
Well, apparently one of these cartridges did go on Yahoo Auctions. It was put up for $33,000.
Oh, wow.
And then apparently there was one of them sold outside the auction privately. But it is insane what people will pay for these, really rare games that nobody else has got. These like private collectors who've got that kind of money. Because looking at it, all right, I mean, if you want to learn how road traffic safety worked in Japan in the late 80s, then knock yourself out. I'm sure you'll find this really interesting, but you've got to admit it's quite a niche market for a game.
Yeah, it's pretty niche. I can't really see like the next kind of retro hour, live stream with us gaming as all huddled around the Master System playing it, really.
Although now you've said that, I really want to do it.
Yeah, we might have to get a hold of it now and do it.
It's very specific as well, isn't it? Because like every country has their own set of traffic rules and safety standards. So you are just learning Japanese traffic law.
It could come in handy.
Yeah, for your next trip out there to raid the retro gaming markets.
Yeah, unless they've changed it since 1988.
Yeah, I'll just pull that. If I get pulled over or something, I'll just be like, oh, well, I learned it from this. So
just make sure your Master System's in your bag with that game at all times.
Exactly.
Fine. Now, there's been another development in the it's seemingly never-ending drama that is the new Atari VCS console. Of course, still no sign of it yet, and obviously we know a lot of stuff's been delayed with the current events in the world. But we were talking last year actually about the people that were working on the new Atari VCS console, and one of those people was one of the guys who was one of the original architects on the Xbox who was involved in this, and it turns out that Rob Wyatt, that's the guy's name, he's actually filed a lawsuit against Atari Game LLC, saying that they've failed to pay him nearly $262,000 for the work that he did on the console.
Ouch.
I mean, surely that's like a couple of years worth of work. That's not like a couple of weeks worth of work, for it to be like $262,000.
Yeah, that's pretty well paid if so, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And I think that's the main appeal at the moment. Like, the Atari VCS, they still haven't announced that much stuff, special titles and stuff, but it looks nice.
Yeah, well, I think it just seems like this whole project, just when you think things are kind of going all right with it and maybe it's getting back on track, it seems like there's like another bump in the road. It just feels like riddled with drama,
A bit
hasn't it?
cursed,
from day
isn't
one?
it?
Yeah, it does kind of feel like that. And obviously, it's not a good sign if one of the main developers on the system's suing them for $250,000 worth of lost work. So, I mean, obviously, until it kind of goes to court, we won't really know the ins and outs of that. But I think it just doesn't. It's one other bit of bad PR that they didn't need in this project, I think.
Yeah, it's like Ravi says it's cursed, but all I keep seeing is this bad PR, and it's like so much of it just seems to be. Obviously, we don't always know the full story, like Dan says, until the court case comes out and stuff, but it just all seems to be self-inflicted. Like, they're the ones not paying people, they're the ones not meeting goals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think that is the reason why people have given it the benefit of the doubt, is because the case looks nice.
Yeah.
I think you're right, yeah. That is it. 'Cause, I mean, it's pretty much a bog standard PC with their kind of own software running on there, but having a gaming PC in that case, I must admit that is probably the only thing that appeals to me about it.
Yeah, and that's the thing at the end of the day, like, could they have just not just released the case? Do you know what I mean? All this effort.
Yeah.
When they could have just released the case for people to then make their own PCs in it.
That wouldn't be a bad shout, actually.
No.
They could have got that out like 2 years ago, couldn't
They
they?
literally could have got that out like when it all started 2-3 years ago.
But then if they lose the rights to use the case now, what is there left?
I'm looking at the comments here on Ars Technica on the article as well. Someone's saying, is this going to be Atari's next ET moment when they crash the gaming market again? Hopefully it won't be that severe.
I don't think this is going to crash the gaming market somehow.
You don't think it's got the power to kill the Nintendo Switch?
I don't think it has somehow, but I think it'd be it's definitely an interest, like interesting to follow it and follow the developments which are kind of happening with it and kind of see the ship kind of trying to stay afloat, and maybe we'll see it sink, maybe we'll see it sail, we don't know.
Because it had a hell of a lot of backers at the beginning, but like I don't know how many it will have now after all of the stuff, how many people have pulled out and stuff, you know.
And there's been no confirmation of, dates and everything yet, but I imagine that original, obviously we're past March 2020, which I think was when we heard it was going to be out. Obviously still no sign of it yet, but we know a lot of retro projects have been delayed due to manufacturing issues and obviously people having no money at the moment as well. So we'll keep an eye on it. I mean, it does seem like most of the stories we're getting about it at the moment are not all that positive, but, it could turn the tide. Like I said, I just want one of these systems just for the look of it, because I think it looks really cool, but yeah, we shall see how that goes. Now, a system that obviously didn't need any help because it took over the world and still to this day regarded as one of the best home consoles ever. Nice when we get new developments for the original PlayStation. Now, this is really cool, the PS1 Digital. Now, this is a little addition that you can put inside your original PlayStation. It's a bit of a hardware mod that you put in there that gives you a lot of new functionality, particularly in terms of the visual output.
Yeah, this is crazy. It's basically under development at the moment. And what it is it's called the PS1 Digital. It's a tiny little FPGA, which is a fully programmable gate array, which is a little board that you can kind of tell to do certain things. And this sits on top of a few chips. I think there may be a bit of soldering required because I see it's connected with ribbon cables. So
right.
I'm not that good at PlayStation knowledge, so not sure. But it does have some great little functions. Like it's got a HDMI connector on there, which replaces the serial port at the back. Now, the HDMI connector is connected directly to the digital video signal. So if you've seen Xbox RGB mods or even stuff on the GameCube, they tap directly into the signal. That's what this is doing. So it gets a RGB display, really nice quality. But also, now that they've put this HDMI connector instead of the serial port, they don't have that option to use the serial port. So what they've done is they've added a Wi-Fi chip on there. So you're able to use extra functionality, networking. But they've also added a mod chip on there as well. So this is like a little all-in-one kind of board. And it won't conflict with any stuff that you've got like the PSIO, the kind of SD card loader. Yeah.
But it's good that it does upscaling as well, because, I mean, that's kind of always the issue that you've got trying to connect classic systems to modern TVs. I mean, this will do upscaling up to 1080p for NTSC consoles, 578p for PAL consoles. You've got digital sound delivered over the HDMI as well, color correction, gamma correction, custom color mapping on here too. Like you said, it's got a mod chip on board as well, so rather than having to, play around with all those dodgy old modifications and wiring on chips and wires and stuff everywhere. I think this looks like a really tidy way to kind of bring your old PlayStation a bit more in the 21st century.
And is this is going to be available for the public? Like, people are going to be able to buy this online and stuff?
Yeah. I think it's in development at the moment, but yeah, they're going to put these out there. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So it looks like a really good all-in-one little addition to your PS. I mean, especially even trying to get a mod chip in there can be a bit of a headache.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried to mod a system?
No, not myself, no, but I know Ravi's quite handy with it.
I've always opened up. I've never modded myself, but I've always opened up old PlayStation 1s and I've looked inside, and some of the mods, like, people are literally put down tape or blue tack to hold it in place. It's absolutely crazy.
And that I was
still work, you know.
That's the kind of stuff I always kind of hear with, like, the original PlayStation. It's always like these, like, oh yeah, you blue tack this down, you sellotape this here, and you put a book on top of it while it's playing and stuff like that. So it's interesting to see something coming, like, which by the looks of things you probably just kind of solder onto the board, and then it's going to do all these, like, magical things for us without us having to, like, play around with blue tack and sellotape and stuff.
And because I guess that it's FPGA, so it'll be flashable, you may be able to upload it because it says that this mod chip is built off the Open PSNE project. So maybe, like, you can flash it and add some more functionality in there, or as they upgrade it, have little updates for the actual board.
Yeah, apparently the updates are going to be done over Wi-Fi, so yeah, you don't have to open it up and plug anything
lovely.
in. So yeah, I've actually been playing my PlayStation 1 quite a bit again recently because before lockdown, I went to see the folks about a month ago for my dad's birthday, and back in my hometown, there's like still a couple of like gaming shops, and some of them actually have kind of turned into, these retro gaming kind of, where it's retro games, vinyl, they do CDs, DVDs, one of those kind of shops. And I went in there and they had like literally a wall full of PlayStation 1 games. Recently, I've been on a bit of a PS1 collecting tip again. So I got London Racer 1 and 2. And I hadn't played those for years. So, I've actually been playing that quite a bit over the last couple of weeks. So I'm quite back into my PlayStation 1. I've got it permanently set up in my office at home again now.
Do you reckon they'll have to make a little browser or something for it? Maybe you could get like a PS1 Twitter client or something in the future. That'd be cool.
Well, if it's got this Wi-Fi chip in there, I imagine you could probably build some interface where you connect to it from your PC, like, through a web browser or something.
Yeah.
So, and to dump your games on, that'd be awesome. So I do like seeing new hardware for classic systems. And it just seems like we said, then they're becoming tidier, more efficient, more affordable as well with every kind of new version of them that comes out. So definitely a welcome addition. Now, before we get into this week's special guest, talking about companies like Psygnosis, Bullfrog, EA, Grain Bell's coming up in a moment, let's chat about Atari's new casino. Now, here's something I didn't think we'd see from Atari either. What is this, and is this like a virtual casino?
Yeah, so we talked about Atari having their own cryptocurrency, which was Atari Coin. Well, Atari Token, actually, sorry. I don't think it can be called Coin for some legal reason. But what they've done is they've opened Atari Casino, which is a cryptocurrency-based casino that will be coming online. And you'll be able to play casino games, slots and, live casino stuff, an Atari special as well. Now, I thought if they were going to do a casino, surely you'd have like arcade games on there, or
I would have thought they'd use like some of their IPs or something. Like even if it was slots, when you see these like Indiana Jones slot machines and stuff like that, you would have thought they'd do something like, I don't know, like I can't even think of any sort of like classic Atari IPs right now, but like
Missile Command
or ET. Something like that.
Complete ET and win the jackpot.
Yeah,
but I've seen like around the kind of whole of the internet, people have been slating this. I've even got an article here on CNN which says this cryptocurrency casino is the latest terrible idea from Atari.
It's so
after the hotels.
It's so bizarre at the moment. They're like trying to put their fingers in so many pies, and I just don't feel like they know what they want to do. Like Dan says, they want to be hotels, they want to be a casino, they want to release a new console. Like, it just do what you know how to do and just make games. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think it's a bit of a ploy. So, they've created this Atari token. A way to get this token to obviously get value would be to have it in use. So they use the brand name as open up a casino, have other tokens in there, and then slowly their value of the Atari token might rise.
And this is only online. It's not like there's no physical casinos. They're not going to be opening up in Vegas.
That'd be amazing.
See, that I would go to. Although I've only been to Vegas once, and I think I spent like a month's wages in a weekend.
Oh, God.
So,
Did you
that's
win
probably why I've
anything,
never
Dan?
been back. No, well, I don't know. Have you been to Vegas before?
No.
Well, generally what we found is when we went in any of the casinos, and I mean, I'm not a gambler normally anyway, I'm terrible at it, but that everyone we went in, like an attractive lady would come over with a shot of alcohol for you on the house. And then obviously by the time you've had 5 or 6 of them, you're getting a bit looser with your wallet. So it's not a bad ploy actually what they do out there in terms of getting you drunk, because then you spend more money. But yeah, after the end of the weekend, I was like, yeah, okay, that's my fix done. So I haven't gambled since. That was about 10 years ago.
I think if they open an Atari casino, I think it'd be the next Retro Hour trip to Las Vegas.
See, that'd be a business trip then.
Yeah,
That's all right.
100%.
That's fine. So yeah, if you do want to find out more about the Atari casino, I mean, it's probably a good time to launch something like that, I guess, with everyone being indoors at the moment. I mean, probably the only companies that are doing well out of everything is like internet companies at the moment.
There is a loose connection between video games and fruit machines and stuff like that. But I would have liked to see if they were going down the gambling route. I don't approve of it, but if you were use arcade games or something that's
100%.
A bit more fun.
Yeah, they're definitely missing a trick there.
You talk about like fruit machines and stuff. That's one thing I've never got on home computers and stuff when they bring out fruit machine simulators. Surely the fun of it is winning the money.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Why they existed, yeah. Who was playing them back in the day? There was so many of them as well. Really weird. So, yeah, if you're doing to check out the Atari Casino, we'll put a link to that in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, of course, we are doing the show remotely this week, but we have got a goal at the moment to try and get our own studio built, obviously, when all this is over and gets back to normal. We're going to be back in our normal studio for a while, of course, as long as we can. But, I mean, our long-term goal is to get our own Retro Hour studio built. Now, we do appreciate that a lot of people at the moment, probably most people are, pulling the purse strings a little bit tighter than usual. But if you would like to help us out in our goal of getting our own Retro Hour studio built so we can keep the show going into the future, all you have to do is join us on Patreon. Now, we've got a Patreon that's up and running, and thank you so much for your support over the last month or so. I mean, to be fair, we probably did launch our Patreon at the worst possible time.
Yeah, probably the worst time in history to ever launch one. But we're going to be able to get into this place. Dan's already got all the equipment. So when we talk about building a studio, I think it's more putting up a bit of walls and soundproofing. But what we're going to do is actually get in this place, and then it's going to be a great base for us. As soon as this stuff's kind of over, we'll be able to go in there, have it nice and clean, get down and do some good recording.
Yeah, and obviously it's going to be our own place, so we can get in there all hours of the day. We can do extra content for you as well. And we're already coming up with ideas for doing video in there, live streams, lots of stuff as well. So when we've got our own place, it's just going to give, a whole new dimension to this show that at the moment with our current studio, we're limited to like an hour or two a week. But having one that we can use pretty much any hour of the day is going to open up so many new possibilities for us. So if you have helped us so far, we're trying to give as many shouts as we can each week for our Patreon supporters. We want to say a huge thank you this week to Steve Engeldow,
Henrik Leidberg,
Stephen Quinn,
Chris Riley,
and Dirk Seigert,
who all made donations into the running of the show and, of course, find their place on the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Thank you so much for your support. We've been putting a few little Patreon exclusives out as well. I mean, patrons recently have been getting the show a couple of days early. We released our documentary that we made all about the importance of preserving video games. So if you back us on our Patreon, you can check that out right now. We've been getting some nice feedback about that, actually. So thank you so much for that, guys. Now, before we get into this week's guest, just time to do this week's Retro Picks. What I'm loving as well is the fact that a lot of companies at the moment are actually releasing little freebies, so people can play. Because obviously, we're all at home right now. Maybe you've had a long day working on the laptop, or you've been homeschooling the kids when they go to bed. You want to unwind a little bit. And to be fair, there's only so much Netflix you can watch in a week. So it's good to get some games out. And if you've got an Amiga, actually, the guys who were behind, do you remember that game Tanks Furry? We were big fans of that, weren't we?
Yeah, I love that game.
Yeah, and they also did a follow-up game called Bridge Strike that I think we talked about. This is the guys behind their Project R3D as well. Now, this was it was a commercial game that they released, but while a lot of the world's in lockdown, they've decided to put that out completely free. So if you want to download it, it's kind of a modern version of River Raid, if you remember that game by Activision back in the day. It's got those same kind of pastel, really nice tidy kind of high-res graphics that Tanks Fury had as well. So usually you'd have to pay around €11, I think, to get it, but they're actually giving it away to play completely for free and download on your Amiga, and I think it works with any Amiga as well. So if you want to check that out, I'll link that up in our show notes. What have you been checking out this week, Joe?
So for me, mine was actually a video by a guy called, so he's a Redditor, so it's just on Reddit, Fred, a guy called Dax Martin. So he's an American guy who lives in Toronto, and I just absolutely love this. He's been playing retro games off a projector onto the side of an apartment building. So Dan will put it in the show notes. But essentially, what he's been doing is like he's been getting like a big 30-foot projection of Mario Kart on the side of some apartment buildings. And he's literally just been playing it from his bedroom, and everybody's loving it. And apparently he's on about doing a film on there and blasting it out with some speakers just while everybody's in lockdown. But he's been playing retro games every night at 9:00. He's been playing Bubble Bobble, Mario Kart. I absolutely love it. And I just thought, I'm so jealous that I can't do this.
You know, when you were a kid and you were allowed to take your console down to the living room and play it on the big TV?
This
kind of takes that to the next level.
It's literally the adult version of that.
Yeah, I saw him playing Aladdin on it the other night as well on the SNES. So yeah, he's been doing all sorts on there. But it's cool. I mean, even if you lived in the apartment building and the light was coming through your window, I wouldn't even be mad.
No, apparently everybody's been really on board with it, and nobody's been upset about it. So that's why he's like, "Oh, I want to put some films on it as well."
No, we need feel-good stories like that in these times,
100%.
don't we? What about you, Ravi?
Yeah, so this is an amazing thing that I spotted this week, and it's by a senior lecturer at Swansea University called Rhys Jones, and it's a teletext bot, but it's probably the slowest way you can possibly get teletext in the world. It's a bot on Twitter.
Right.
So what happens is you at the bot with the page of the teletext. You at the bot with the number of the page that you want to actually get to. So it goes from 400 to 599 for channel 4. So I wanted to go into racing. I would at the teletext bot 470, and the teletext bot would then go onto teletext, take a little screenshot of it, and then tweet me back.
Amazing.
So you get like a graphic of the actual page.
Yeah, so you can use teletext via Twitter now.
Because some people might be thinking, well, teletext shut down years ago, surely. There is still services running, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. There's a free version of teletext that's out there at the moment. And, the fans have kind of taken over teletext once again.
Probably not the quickest way to book your holiday, though, doing it this way, I imagine. So that is a teletext bot on Twitter. You can check out all the retro pics and everything else we talked about this week. You don't have to Google them or anything like that. I put them all in our show notes every week. You can get them on your podcast client or just nip onto our website at theretrohour.com. Well, hopefully this worked all right, I think, guys, doing it from home. I think we got through this first half of the episode.
I've got pictures of Dan and Joe up here, so I can look at
That's
them.
a great idea, actually.
It's got Joe's head sellotaped to a pumpkin.
Cheers.
Well, listen, thank you so much for checking out the news this week, everybody. I hope you're all staying safe and well. We'll have more news for you on next Friday's show. And right now, let's get some stories about legendary companies, Psygnosis, Bullfrog, EA. Ravi is going to be chatting to legendary video game artist Graham Bell.
You're listening to the Retro Hour, and I'm here with Graham Bell, designer and video game artist. How are you doing, Graham?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's great. I've been a long-term fan. It's good to actually be involved in one.
Well, we've got a question that we always ask our guests first, and that was what was your first gaming experience?
Oh, that's basically it's got to be in the 80s. I was very much a Spectrum guy. So my parents, actually, I think I had a ZX81 first to begin with, and I didn't have it very long. I don't know if maybe my parents realised that the Spectrum had just come out, but I quickly got upgraded to a Spectrum 48K with all the rubber keys and everything. And that was my first foray into proper gaming, really. Oh, I think we had we had one of those kind of TV video systems as well. If you remember, like the grandstand video systems,
like,
which were
like a Biotone one or one of those.
Yeah, they were like
Pong games.
they were the size of a suitcase and weighed as much, and they had like 10 preloaded games really. And I think that was my very, very first one. I think that was possibly very early in the 80s. But in terms of computing, it was definitely the Spectrum, and I was full on in as a Specky fan, and it's the same now. Like you were either a Spectrum guy or a Commodore 64 guy, And if you're really weird, you're an Amstrad guy. So yeah, that was my first foray into it, really. And I was going through school at the time, and we were
lots of playground rivalry then.
Yes, yeah, definitely, yeah. I think my best mate at the time had a Commodore 64. A few other people, mate. Yeah, so definitely rivalry in the playground. Definitely, yeah. It didn't spill over into anything else, but there was always competition. Well, and I've got this game, well, I've got that as well. And the Commodore guys would always hit you with the sound chip. The sound chip on the Commodore 64 was really good, and it was always, the speech was that bit better. So they'd always hit you with the audio, basically. Whereas the Spectrum was quite simple to play, and the games are every bit as good, really. So,
did you end up doing any kind of art on the Spectrum, or were you just like admiring stuff and playing games?
I was just really a gamer. I was a typical kid of my age, really. Probably a proper in-betweener, if I'm honest. And yeah, so I was just into the games. But also what I did like as well is I was very much into, I had all the magazines. I'd buy the magazines religiously, get my parents to buy them anyway. And yeah, you'd go through the machine code you used to have pages of machine code you'd type out in BASIC, and then you'd run it and it wouldn't work. And you just go, okay, back to playing, Jetpack or something. Whereas perhaps the more programmer minded would perhaps want to go in there and start playing with it to find out, well, where did it go wrong and what happened. But yeah, that was I was very much a game. I didn't really do much art back then, but I was very much into art anyway at school, and it was that was really where I was starting to go towards as a potential thing that I wanted to do as a career. Not that I thought about career back then, but it was something I was really interested in. I wanted to pursue a lot further. And what really inspired me was often some of the covers and the box artworks for the not the box art, but the cover disc artworks to the games, and also in the magazines you'd have these full page adverts. And they were very illustrative.
Roger Keane was one of the artists.
Yeah,
for the
Roger Keane.
as well, and they
Chris
had
Foss and a few of the guys.
Special look, didn't they? Each magazine as well.
Yeah. So I was very much into computer and video games as a magazine. There was Your Sinclair. Crash as well was the Spectrum one, and the other one was the Zap 64 for the Commodores. But they all had kind of similar feel to some extent, and obviously their own individual brands. But yeah, it was the cover artworks I really got into, and I started keeping scrapbooks of it because as a person who wanted to go into illustration, and I was starting to learn more and more about it, I would see them as kind of an inspiration. And it wasn't really until a little bit later that I realised this guy called Bob Wakelin was like the guy behind almost nearly everything that I saw at the time. Yeah, he was a massive inspiration to me, really. And I didn't really find, because back then there was no internet. You couldn't really just Google the guy because that whole concept didn't even exist. So it wasn't until I started studying a bit more and was doing a bit more research did I find out who this person was, and that he was doing a lot of the artwork at the time for like Ocean and Imagine and a whole load of others. And so yeah, he was a massive inspiration to me, really.
There were a lot of like crossover between album covers as well and video game covers. Were you into those as well with music culture at the time? Yeah,
definitely. So I was I was very much into like electronic music. I've got quite a broad taste in music, really, but I was never really a die-hard fan of kind of like rock or anything like that. But I kind of liked what I heard, really. So I used to dabble in quite a lot, but I did have a really big interest in like those kind of electronic music bands. So I was massive into the Pet Shop Boys, New Order, OMD, Erasure, all that kind of stuff. They had a certain sound I just liked. And certainly with bands like the Pet Shop Boys and New Order, that when you bought an LP, you were almost, it felt like you were buying a piece of artwork. They were very well designed, and they put a lot of effort into that as well. So yeah, that was another kind of thing that kind of really inadvertently inspired me a little bit. And then you want to know more about it. You want to know how did they do that? How did they do that effect? How did they even do that cover? How did they design that? And then that was when that kind of just spurred my interest even more, really. But yeah, there was a little bit of a crossover, I think, as you get further into the 80s, the design was getting stronger and stronger, basically.
Why do you think like such extravagant art box covers were needed at the time?
I think really what it was is that if you depended on the graphics and the game, that you couldn't really use them. They were never going to be print quality. I think also you needed something aspirational that you needed to it needed to pop off the shelf as well, because back then, I mean, it's hard to always keep saying back then, of course, because it was quite some time ago now, but you'd walk into a store like WH Smith's and the game section was just huge. There was just so many titles. So you're fighting for space on the shelf, and you might have a license to help you, like Batman or anything like that, but you still need to compete along with everybody else. So your cover had to really kind of jump off the shelf at you, and it also had to kind of suck you in and say, well, look, this is, you're going to play a game of action, and and you're going to be beating people up or flying jets or things like that. So it had to really kind of look quite enticing, and it even to the more boring stuff. I think, and of course, the more interest in the game, then that kind of allowed the illustrator to kind of put more effort into it. Because the graphics in the games, as good as they were at the time, they just wouldn't have really been aspirational enough. It's almost like a movie poster. A movie poster doesn't really take a frame from the movie. They generate a piece of artwork which suddenly appeals to you and go, wow, that looks amazing. What is that? And it might have your favourite actor in it or your favourite director making it, but it's got to draw you in. Essentially, it's very similar to any kind of like food labeling or anything like that. There's probably a whole research around this on certain colours appeal to certain people and so on, and that's kind of really what it's about, I think.
Interestingly, it's none of it's digital, is it? Back then, it was all hand drawn, or it's done airbrushed. It's a very kind of a traditional process for creating the art.
Oh yeah. Watercolor, gouache with airbrush as well. Yeah, I mean, would you class that as old school now? But
maybe hand drawn or illustrated.
Yeah, hand drawn. Yeah, but no. Yeah, you literally go from. You'd almost start with a blank piece of paper. And I remember hearing Bob talk on, I think, one of your podcasts actually, or those interviews where he wouldn't go through almost like an approval process. He would literally just go from a few sketches to the artwork and then go, that was it, it's done. And and that was again something that I was starting to get a bit more involved in when I eventually finished school and went to further my education a lot more, and I wanted to kind of learn a lot more of these techniques, and then eventually I trained up as a more traditional airbrush illustrator.
That's interesting, because we talked earlier and actually you jumped from 8-bit to like 32-bit. You totally missed
I know.
Whole 16-bit period. So
I guess it.
Were you like illustrating and doing other stuff during that period then?
Yeah, so I guess I finished school in '88. First people to do GCSEs. I went on to college. I grew up in Peterborough, Cambridgeshire, so I went to college in Wisbech, Cambridgeshire, which was about 30 miles away, I think it is, because they had these really good art and design courses which just weren't available at my nearest college. And you're just too busy. I mean, it would have been great to continue the gaming, but really the coursework was intense and there was just no time. I was doing long days on the bus going to college, and eventually I went to Falmouth as well to further to go the next level up. And then it got to about 93, and that's when I finished and then went into the world of work as a freelancer. So yeah, I completely missed that whole generation, the whole Amiga, Mega Drive type stuff, which kind of was a shame really, because I think if I had been, I would have been literally playing games all day, every day, really.
Probably not got that much work done.
Yeah, and it's interesting about the jump, because that was when I first started getting involved with the PlayStation. And I first started kind of understanding that some the marketing around it and the strategy. I remember them saying they were targeting very much people of my age group who had gone through university and so on. And
well, you had gone from university and you were working on travel guides, and there was a guy downstairs doing some really cool stuff for Ministry of Sound. How did that kind of lead you into the advertising world?
Yeah, so it's a kind of usually so at Falmouth they were very good at reaching out to industry in trying to get like live commissions for students to work on. And the idea was that it was all probably done as a business entity. And the idea was that students would have kind of proper commissioned artwork in their folio when they left. And that would give them hopefully a little bit more advantage going into the workplace. And there was a studio in outer southeast London borders in Bromley, and there was an student there at Falmouth, and he had a business with his partner. They had a contract to do travel guides, and it was a certain style of illustration, and they had more work than they could handle. So they went to Falmouth and said, look, have you got anybody who fits this style? We'd really be keen to talk to them because we've got a whole lot of work here. And then that's kind of how it started. So I just got a phone number and a name, and then I phoned it up, and then next thing I know, I've got my first commissioned work, which was for Alcatraz Island in San Francisco, for the San Francisco travel guide. Yeah. So I got this packed through the post, and I was working at home at the time. And then literally within a few months, I was at the studio in Bromley, working there pretty much like on site. And it was where I kind of cut my teeth commercially. So the guys there, they ran a pretty good studio. There was initially just 2 guys there, but eventually they split their business up. And so there was just one of the founding members. I stayed on with him to do all this kind of work and everything. And we were turning over quite a bit of work. There was loads of travel guide stuff. There was Dorling Kinsley was the publisher, and they had a reputation for quality and a very illustrative style in their books. So we did a San Francisco. Oh man, there was Loire Valley. I think Venice and the Veneto. There were too many I can even remember. Really, it was just constant. And then we worked in this kind of this small office block, which was like this rundown business enterprise scheme offices. So it was cheap rent. So it was ice cold in the winter and like a sauna in the summer. And there was a guy downstairs. The funny story how we kind of all met was we just hear the door slam, and then he would go downstairs, and then you hear this really loud music, and it would just thump through the floor. And so, of course, we're sitting there trying to work, and in the end, you just go, oh, I can't stand it anymore. I'm just going to go down and talk to this guy. And we got to the point where we didn't really want to create a fuss, but it was just like, I'm going to kill that guy. I'm going to go downstairs and kill him. And we opened the door, and literally just, this guy was standing in front of us, and he just had all this paint splattered on the wall and everything. And it was just like, what the hell are you doing? And so he goes, the music's just too damn loud, guys. We can't hear ourselves think. So then we kind of chatted a bit and kind of put the shotguns down and then decided to talk to each other. And then we got talking to him, and he said, "I know I'm doing these interior designs for nightclubs." And he's like, "Oh wow, cool. What are you guys doing?" "Oh, we're doing this artwork for advertising and publishing and all this kind of stuff." And I was like, "Oh wow, And he said, "I use computers." And I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, I do it on 3D in this 3D software." And he had an Apple Macintosh computer, and he showed us a package called Infinity, which probably won't mean anything to you, but to an artist of my age, they'll go, "Oh my God, Infinity." And it was like he'd shown us fire for the first time. It was we were used to airbrushing chrome spheres and letters, and he said, I could just do a letter, do a font, ray trace it, and look, I've got it reflective. It's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so yeah, and then over time, we quickly all started to collaborate together. We kind of consolidated our businesses a little bit, and then the business owner was very good at selling the work. So we put together some sample pieces, and then he went out into the world and started to try and sell this work. And then the work just came in like crazy. It was huge. There was so much of it because we could do it so quickly, and it was a whole much more flexible than just trying to do it by airbrush and paint, really.
So that kind of 16-bit period that you'd missed was like the 3D rendering, but incredibly slowly. So you probably just came and like saw this 3D object get rendered there on the spot in real time, and yeah, it must have been mind-blowing.
The software was getting better all the time. It was moving so quickly. And at that time, we're now into kind of early to mid-90s now. So we're getting into like 94, 95. Everything was moving so quickly in terms of like the creative industries across the board, both musically, in terms of design. And the software was getting better. The computers were getting faster as they were. The memory was getting more, although it's, your phone has probably got more memory than we had back then. But to us, it was a real big deal. So we started doing more and more work, and we started to find that clients were coming forward with this, and it had a new, fresh look. And we started to notice there was a few design agencies as well that were starting to explore this as well. So we think So it's like, okay, we're onto something now. And then that was when something called the PlayStation came along.
When did you first hear about the PlayStation, and how did you get your hands on one?
So we started doing. We managed to get into. I think was it Future Publishing or one of the magazine publishers who used to publish multiple games magazines.
Probably Future,
and,
they were the
big. And we started to get commissions for doing magazine covers of games. And this was like, because the Saturn had come out first. And I think there's a lot of people who don't often realise that that they'd asked us to start doing these magazine covers because, as with the box artwork, they couldn't really use the graphics from the game to do a magazine cover. So we started doing some stuff around that. And then that had caught the eye of a company called the Attic Design Company. And they contacted us and said, look, we've really seen your work. I mean, we were doing advertising for everybody, all the main agencies, JWT, Ogilvy and Mather, Grey Advertising, all the big names, Saatchi's.
And was that due to the resolution not being that good? And if they would do screenshots of the games, they would still look awful. You'd have to, they
wouldn't
blow
scale
it up.
up.
You'd have to do a great render.
Yeah, we were doing artwork at 300 DPI at the time in Photoshop. And also Photoshop as well, interesting. Photoshop had just gone to version 3.
Still on floppy disk, probably.
And also version 3 introduced layers for the first time, which you talk to people now, I talk to people I work with, they're going like, you mean they've never known a Photoshop without layers? And it's like it's like now I'm feeling a bit old, but so that changed things as well. So there's a good example of how the software and technology was starting to offer a lot more opportunity than it used to before. So the capability was like, I can now do this, and now as I can now do this, I can now do this as well. So the Attic had contacted us. The guy that said, look, we've seen your work and we've spoken to these guys, and your name's come up and really like your look, and we've got a really good design look, but we don't have much 3D competency. So we're wondering if we could get you guys involved. And it's like, okay, fine. What's the job? Is it an advertising? He said, well, we've landed a contract with Sony for their new games console, the PlayStation. And we said, oh yeah, we've kind of heard of that. Don't know much about it. And he said, well, look, it's Friday now. I'm down your way. I'll tell you what, let me come by the studio and let's have a chat about it, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So the guy turned up on I think a Friday, and he brought in this case and opened it up, and there was a PlayStation, and it was all in Japanese. It wasn't even a European version. And we plugged it into the TV, and the first game on it was Ridge Racer.
Oh, sweet!
And that was it. It was like watching, you think, my God, this is amazing. This is really, really cool. And also what I liked about it was that it wasn't black. It was like grey. And it had a certain quality to it as well. When you picked it up, it felt like you got something in your hand. And that was a stark difference to the Saturn, which was like a typical black, shiny box, really. So they were very much a stark contrast.
And they always seemed to get it right, didn't they, Sony, with the feel of stuff like the Discman and the Walkman before, and
Yeah, I think that was the key to it, really, because so the guy showed us this game. That's what we were playing it. And he's like, "What are you saying?" No, I'm too busy. And it's like we're just playing it. And he goes, "Okay, guys." And we had a few chats about what Miami's, and they'd got the contract to do, I think, all of the point of sale material and many of the launch material for the PlayStation and early titles. And he said, I'll tell you what, guys, I'll leave it with you for the weekend and I'll pick it up on Monday. That was it. I don't think we ate or slept the entire weekend and just thought this thing is going to be huge. So then the guy came back to pick it up, and he said, look, why don't you guys come into Sony with me? I'm going there later in the week. They're doing a briefing. It'd be really good if you guys came and had a look and listen to what they had to say. So we went up there, and that was when I first saw the dinosaur demo as well.
Were there other people there as well?
There was a mixed room of people. So there was various advertising, marketing people, and that was when I first saw Jeff Glendinning as well, who was one of the marketing guys for Sony, one of the key guys. And then they started talking about their strategy, and it's like, again, and it started to resonate with me quite a lot, because it's like, it's me. You're targeting someone like me. And they were talking about the club culture they were looking to tap into. They showed us some stuff of like Wipeout and some of the Designer Republic covers that they were doing as well. And I'm thinking, wow, this is a very different feel to a traditional games market and games console. And I remember them saying that, we're targeting a slightly older demographic. We'll always get the kids. The kids almost come by default. But now if we target this group here, which is really a certain age that have been through education, have gone into the workplace, and have maybe got some expendable income, they're out clubbing and so on, and they were looking to do this weird crossover. And you can read up about this. I'm not necessarily giving away anything secret, but so they really hit the target big time with that.
Did you think that it was kind of a bit of a risky move for them to actually go into clubbing culture and stuff, because the reputation wasn't amazingly, family friendly back then?
No, it wasn't. It was. Yeah, there was, and there was obviously an undertone of drugs as well.
Yeah.
But I think they were trying to it felt like to me they were trying to capitalize on very much the moment. And because you're talking now into like 95, right in the middle of the decade. So you had this kind of Britpop thing that was building as well. And there'd already been a recession a few years earlier as well, I think, and we're starting to come out of that a little bit more now. So, there was a little bit more of a buzz in the air. There's all these new bands coming up like Blur and Oasis as well, and a whole load of others. And there was a new sound coming. I think they were really trying to capitalize on that. That was kind of what I felt anyway. So, yeah, it was a gamble, but I think as well, Sony kind of really had a lot going for them. They understood electronic hardware, definitely. They understood the consumer, and they understood how to make hardware. So I think, and that was when I first was introduced to the idea of Psygnosis as well, because they obviously spoke about that they owned Psygnosis, and it was a European game developer, and that allowed them to kind of tap into that market a little bit more as well. And the quality was looking really good, and also that reflected in the titles as well. It wasn't a traditional games art cover. It was like there's some real serious design behind it, and again, it had a look about it which resonated with people as well. I mean, you're into the realms of like the Prodigy as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot happening around that time, both in the music industry, and Sony understood the music industry because they owned labels. So I think that was where they were trying to tap into that expertise in order to launch this new product.
How important were like shops and retail displays back then? And did you get involved creating retail displays?
Yeah, so after that meeting, that was when the work started coming. Yeah, and again, it was, with any launch of any new hardware, you need games to play. So there was a whole range of titles being prepared. And again, the Saturn was already out there. So, Sony were coming late to the market a little bit as well. Plus also the PC games were gaining momentum as well. Their boxes were bigger. So again, you had to really think about where your position was going to be in the store, and then all the point of sale and the flyers and all the marketing materials and posters that came with it. So again, it was like just launching any kind of product, and I think it was really important. I think, and that's why agencies like The Attic were brought on board, because they understood that all the things you need. You don't just do a box artwork and that's it. You need a poster, you need a campaign, and you build materials around that campaign. And that was, point of sale material, there's posters, all the magazines as well wanted their own posters, and you could do different posters for different outlets and different markets so that people had a sense of like they were seeing something new for the first time. So yeah, I think it's incredibly important, and I think that continued for pretty much most of the lifespan of the PlayStation.
What kind of led to you wanting to change your career and focus on maybe a games company?
That's a really good question. So we were doing very, very well. The game stuff had started off pretty well, but had plateaued a bit really after the launch of the PlayStation. We had a constant feed of work, but at the same time, I wasn't seeing much of the money in my pocket. And I think it come to a point where perhaps all of us face these crossroads throughout our careers, maybe, and go, well, do I want to stay here? Do I want to move on? What do I want to do? I was thinking about maybe that the games are something I really wanted to get into, and it seemed to be the natural progression for me. And again, software was getting better, the quality was getting better, also not only in games but also film visual effects as well. In the mid-90s, you were seeing a big burst of quality in terms of CGI characters in films like Jurassic Park and Jumanji and so on. So there was, I thought to myself, hang on, there's something going on here, and we're not quite there yet. So I'm going to have to either leave to get into this, or hopefully stay and then see what develops. And I thought I'm maybe just to look at the market and see what's there. And I remember looking at Edge magazine, and Edge magazine back then just had pages and pages of job ads for games companies. And I came across a 2-page advert for Psygnosis, which had a 2-page spread of Wipeout. And they were looking for artists for their London studio, not necessarily 3D artists. They were looking for artists of anybody, any kind of design people, illustration people. So I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And I submitted an application, and the next minute I've got an interview. And I can remember walking into the interview in Knowles Street in Soho, and I walked into the room, and on the room is probably about 4 or 5 of my posters that I'd done for Sony. And I remember turning to the guy and said, "Oh, you've got my poster on why?" He goes, "That's why you're here."
No need to bring your CV. Just
yeah. So it's very much kind of like, okay, well, that's I can only take that as a positive. But of course, I still had to ace the interview. But and then eventually, they offered me a job, and I joined the Psygnosis Camden studio in '96. Not long after Euro '96.
So actually, a lot of listeners will probably be thinking that Psygnosis was just based in Liverpool, but it was split into 3 studios, right?
3, 4, maybe 5 actually. So they had Liverpool was the mothership, of course. That Psygnosis London initial. It was they were in Camden, but then they set up a second London studio in Hanger Lane, off to the west. Then they had Psygnosis Stroud, and then there was Leeds as well, and then I think there was a Paris studio. So they had quite a few studios, but of course Liverpool would had a lot of the attention because that's where Wipeout was made, for example. But also other titles they did as well, like Formula One and Destruction Derby. They were done externally. They were just a publisher. So I think Destruction Derby was done by Reflections, and F1 done by Bizarre Creations.
Well, they were pushing out a lot of titles at the time.
Insane, man.
Very good in the early years. I remember one of my favourites was Overboard. Great game.
Yeah, that was done by. I apologise if I got this wrong to anybody out there, but I'm pretty sure that was a Psygnosis Stroud game. Because they did G-Police as well.
I think it was called Shipwrecked in America or something. That
Possibly,
was like a 2-title thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes. So that was done at Stroud, and that was a great little game. That really was. I don't want to say a little game, but yeah, it was just fun to play, and it looked good, and it had a kind of very Nintendo feel to it, essentially. A proper old school game. But yeah, it was a great time, and the quality was great as well. And they did, and then of course the thing that Psygnosis were really known for was their FMV. Unfortunately, in London, our titles were not quite as good as that. If I have to be honest, at the time, I mean, I thought they were amazing because it was my first experience of working in games, and that's where I cut my teeth. But the quality perhaps wasn't the same as those titles, to be honest with you. But it was still an experience for me, and I learned an awful lot from working in that studio.
Well, what kind of stuff were you working on? So
the first game that I worked on was assigned to was a PC game actually called Zombieville, and if no one's ever heard of it, then that's fine because that's probably deliberate. It was a zombie-based game with a whole kind of supernatural kind of narrative behind it, set on like an army base. Greg Proops, the American comedian, did the voiceover for the character, so they must have spent a fair bit on him. And it was very much a kind of pre-rendered backgrounds with sprites put on top, very kind of similar to Resident Evil, but unfortunately it wasn't as good as quality as Resident Evil was at the time. So that was my first game I worked on, where I did some of the backgrounds, or I helped some of the artists do some of the backgrounds, but I mainly did some of the front end design to it. And I did a whole box artwork design for that, but that didn't get used in the end. But I did pretty much the game logo, in-game logo, all those kind of graphics as well. And then I think after that, I think after I did a few spells, they were doing a space shoot 'em up called Blast Radius. But unfortunately, that was at the same time as Colony Wars was being done. So that obviously got most of the marketing budget, unfortunately. And it is a great game. And then they were doing another game as well called, it was called Bad Custard, but it eventually got called Kingsley's Adventures, I think, for the PlayStation 1. So it's very much like a third-person character game, a bit like Croc. By Argonaut, because there was quite a few of those games. You had Spyro, of course, at the time, Crash Bandicoot, all those type of 3D platformers. There was quite a lot of them at the time. They all had like a little kind of kids character, essentially in 3D. So I think that eventually came out after I left. But yeah, I think that was all they were doing at the Camden studio. And then at Hanger Lane, they had a whole array of titles that they were trying to do, and they were dual SKU, so they were both PlayStation 1 and PC. But I don't think any of them ever got completed in the end. They were all eventually canned.
Yeah, because I remember you mentioning some Games Workshop titles as well. Cause
Blood Bowl.
So many Games Workshop titles in the early PlayStation. I think there was like 2 rival studios going at the same time or something.
Yeah, so I think they'd secured a license to Blood Bowl, which was a 3D
Orc one, wasn't it? It was
3D American football rugby type game. And again, they built loads of levels. They even did some initial FMV, and it was looking really, really good. I think there might have been another one they were doing as well, but I can't remember the name of it. So, but it never saw the light of day. It was a real shame, because the company changed quite a bit after that, really.
It's really weird because I thought Psygnosis was one of the companies that kind of survived the 16-bit period and then went into the 32-bit period and were doing really well. So what happened and how did the F1 license kind of start to ruin the flow of work and the plots?
Yeah, so when I joined in 96, they went into, I think, that Christmas and they launched Formula One for the PlayStation, which was a massive success for them. And it's a great game. I think they launched it when, if my memory serves, being an F1 fan, I've got to get this right. I think it was when Damon Hill won the World Championship.
Wow.
So, of course, it was a perfect marketing thing, really. I mean, you launch a game at the same time he's doing that. It was a license to print money. And it was a very good F1 game. I think it was the first ones on the PlayStation. And, of course, actually, you then had sequels to Wipeout, and Wipeout 2097 is still, I think, one of the best PlayStation games there is out there. It's just, how could you make a better game even better, really?
And they had a PC port of that as well. So.
Yes, they did. Yeah, they're a little bit more forgiving on the steering controls, thank God. But an incredible title, really, and I think unrivaled. I think, to be honest. But yeah, and then it was going into, I think, 97, Christmas 97, and Psygnosis had really built up this huge catalogue of titles, and there was a real kind of thing in the air. They were pushing quite aggressively, I think. So that's when you had Colony Wars, G Police, F197, and I can remember Ian Hetherington saying in an interview that G Police was going to be like Christmas #1, and it looked great as well. It looked really incredibly impressive title, and I think doesn't often get the admiration I think it deserves, because I love that game. And then I think if I can recall, when it went into that Christmas, they had a problem with the license for F197, and so much so that they had to pull it off the shelf. Which of course is like just the worst thing ever, really. I think it was something to do with the logo or the artwork, and said, well, you don't have the license to do this. So it was only maybe about a month after release. So then it got re-released after that. And even then they were still unhappy. And I think also there was another issue with Jacques Villeneuve, the driver, had a different arrangement with the FIA or whoever it was. So he wasn't called that name in the game. I think he was called like Driver #1 or something. Williams #1, I think it was at the time. And again, it was just like beset with problems. But I think as a result of that, because they had to pull the game off the shelf, that's when you're not selling the title. And of course, you're losing so much money. And then it just seemed after that I think, as an observer, for me, it felt like that they then adjusted all the release dates for all the other games and brought them all forward. And then I think then by the time they got to Christmas, they didn't really have a title in the top 10, or if it wasn't even top 5. And so I think that was really, so all these grand plans they had just unravelled, really.
Like a chain reaction going on.
Yeah, and it was a real shame, and it was kind of like, oh man. And I think later on, and then into the new year, into what would be 98, that was when the first signs started to happen where they were starting to trim off some people by making them redundant. And then eventually I got to maybe about May or June time, and then that was when, you know, I was brought into an office and said, I'm sorry, Graham, but we're going to have to make you redundant with these other people as well. You know, that was kind of, I think that was the first step of what was going to be the great culling of Psygnosis, really, because after I left, they then started closing entire studios. They closed off Hanger Lane completely, literally shut the whole thing, put a padlock on the doors, and then had to allow people in to actually get their own belongings. So yeah, I think all those kind of plans really started to cause the company to kind of unravel or really have a look at their expenditure, because they were probably so stacked full of titles, but they weren't bringing in the revenue.
I heard just before you left, though, you went to a huge party in Liverpool and kind of saw the Liverpool office for the first time. What was that like?
Yeah, I think that was, so again, if history serves me well, Psygnosis was set up initially by two guys initially, Ian Hetherington and I think Jonathan Ellis, I think his name was. And I think John was leaving, and he was one of the main guys. And it's like weird. So, and he'd sort of said, "Look, I've done my time. You guys are great." So they had a massive party for him. So they then coached a lot of us up to Liverpool to give him a send off, really. And then there was like, so they had it at the office, and you know they had the party elsewhere. But that's when I saw the Wavertree building for the first time, and it's like it was huge. It was massive compared to what we had at London. You just thought, wow, this is why they're doing all these great games. Look at how many people they've got, and all the QA people up there as well. You know, and you had people like the artists like Lee Karras and Jim Bowers as well up there, who were like some of the guys doing Neil Thompson, who was on that kind of on Wipeout and Crazy Ivan and all this kind of stuff. So these guys were seen as like, wow, these guys are really cool. But yeah, so there was and they had all the F1 stuff there as well. So I think Psygnosis had done a deal with Jordan F1 team at the time to help them out with the marketing as well. So they were all there as well. So yeah, a good time was had by all, shall we say? But yeah, it was good that they were putting it on for him, really, because you know he'd been one of the kind of founding guys, and he'd obviously helped get the company to where it was, really. So I think it was a good send off.
You moved from one legendary company to another, so you went to EA and Bullfrog.
Yeah, so when I got laid off by Psygnosis, I was thinking about, do I try and get into visual effects, into film, or do I maybe have a go at games? And I nearly made it into visual effects at the time. I missed out on opportunities by literally a few weeks. But I'd already gone through some of the recruitment agencies, and they'd lined me up some interviews at Guildford. You know, and I went through two agencies, and one was going for Bullfrog, and one was going for EA. I didn't know at the time that they occupied the same building. So I went to the Bullfrog interview came up first, and I was there for hours, and I was being interviewed by two teams, which again I didn't quite realise at the time. And then eventually the job offer came through, and it was like, I'm a bit confused here. So I had to kind of really smooth things over with one agency as opposed to the other. And the other agency were very nice about it. They said, no, it's fine. You know, they said, also, as far as we're concerned, you're working in the place we would have put you in anyway. So that was really nice of them, really, to miss out on that commission. But yeah, with Bullfrog, it was I came in this would be 98 now, so just after Molyneux had left, really, and Dungeon Keeper 2 was the game I was hired on for. So I was brought on to start looking at the graphic design for that, around some of the icons for the game, maybe some of the initial marketing materials as well, and also some of the front end and user interface type stuff as well, because I think I had an artist working on it, but I think I was brought in just to kind of supply some new ideas or maybe a new take on it. And that was when really I started doing all that kind of FMV work as well, because they'd hired a French company to do all the FMV work, but they'd pretty much blown the budget on, or most of their budget, doing that infamous interview with the Reaper cut, and they'd used pretty much most of their budget on that. And it's like, well, you signed up for this, guys. We want all the other FMV. So they begrudgingly did most of it, but some of it I had to finish off myself, and it was all done in Softimage, the 3D package, which I'd learned that at Psygnosis, because that was the one package they used. So of course that meant, well, we've got a guy here who fits the slots that we need, and also he knows the software as well, so we'll get him in. And then what I didn't know at the time is that I was also being lined up to work on a football game, EA, which was going to be a FIFA spin-off, but for the Premiership. And that was using the FIFA pipeline, which is all based in Softimage as well. And also, it'd done a lot of motion capture, and I'd done a little bit of that at Psygnosis as well, which really made me an expert compared to the rest of EA and Bullfrog at the time, who didn't really know anything about it. So, even just a little bit of knowledge was deemed enough, really. But for DK2, I stayed there for a good few months on that game, got the kind of design turned around a little bit for the front end and user interface, and then I did all the box artwork that infamous box artwork with the white cover with the Reaper and the Mistress standing back to back was all mine.
Well, that building as well, it sounds absolutely crazy, because not only did you have EA and Bullfrog, you had Mindscape downstairs, and you were hanging with guys in the company like Sean Cooper and, legendary game designers.
Yeah, so there was, I didn't notice at the time, but Mindscape had come on board a while back, I think, or been acquired, and they'd done Warhammer Dark Omen, I think, before. And that had been published by EA. That was actually another box artwork I think I'd been involved with as well, or my studio had done before. Because I can remember coming across a guy when he found out I'd done box artworks for games. He said, "Did you do Warhammer Dark Omen?" It's like, I might have done. And it's just like, yeah, we did a design for that, and it got turned down in favour of yours. It was like, okay, sorry. And it's just like, I know it's fine, but they really had kind of thought that their design was better. And I said, well, look, I didn't know anything. I just got told to do a job, and I just did it. So, but I think it was an interesting that's what that happen a lot in games, where developers would invest so much of their time on a title that they wanted to do everything for it. They want to do all the marketing, all the box artwork, all the point of sale stuff. And sometimes it was perhaps better that they weren't involved, because they just didn't have that different hat on from a marketing point of view. But that aside, though, I think those guys were doing Theme Park World. And I think guys like Glenn Corpse are still there. I think he was working on... They were wrapping up on Populous 3, I think, at the time. The beginning, so they were just wrapping up on that, and then guys like Glenn was still there, and he was doing Indestructibles at the time, or that kind of early demo for it as well, because they had another little splinter team which was doing some early design stuff. But there was still quite a few of the, I would say, original Bullfroggers, but still quite a few of the kind of familiar names around, really. And then gradually over time, I think when after Peter left, some people left to set up Mucky Foot. Some guys left, the Carters left to set up Big Blue Box, and they took a few people with them. And then I think Glenn and some other guys left to set up Lost Toys as well. So there was a slow, gradual exodus, really, of people.
All these little studios getting set up, and of course, Molyneux had his own studio as well. I can't remember.
Yes.
Toucans, was it? Or no, that's the new one.
No, that would be was it Lionhead? I don't know if it had a name. Yeah. I don't even know if it had a name at the time. But so yeah, I think that was, and it was an interesting time, because I never got to work with Peter directly, but he always there were people there, and I always wondered what it was like. And there's all this thing where he didn't work on every single game, because often he would put his attention into one thing and one thing only, and that would actually consume everything around him. But one guy I was talking to at the time, he summed it up very well, and he said one thing Peter was very good at is that they'd hired some good people, and there was some brilliant people there. There's absolutely no denying that. So he would often leave them to do stuff, because I'm pretty sure he didn't necessarily have direct involvement in some of the games like Magic Carpet or High Octane. But what he would do is he'd leave them to do it. And often his knack was that whenever they were stuck on a design or were stuck on a problem, he would kind of come into the room and then look at it from a different point of view, and then kind of, well, have you considered this, or what about this, or what about that? And then that would kind of spark things off again. And then he would exit the door and leave them to it again. So he was very good at looking at it from a different point of view and offer his kind of guidance and expertise. And then that would kind of unlock the jam that the guys had got themselves into, and then they were able to continue again. And I heard that from quite a few people. Though having not worked directly with him, I could be completely wrong on that, but I think that's a very common thread.
Were there any later titles developed by Bullfrog, or any unreleased major titles that were planned and then got canned at the end?
Yeah, so I think there was a few. I think after because I think when not long after I joined, they consolidated a few of the theme parks. So I think they were doing theme prison or theme aquarium or theme. There was another theme one, and I think they just said, "Look, let's just get to theme park world, essentially, and then build off that." Indestructibles was the one of the big things that they were working on, and they'd done a lot of work for that as well. There was a rolling demo that was kind of playable, and there's some interesting dynamics as well. So I think there was that had a real potential around it, really. And then I think the change came when they moved from Guildford to Chertsey, the big Chertsey campus. That was, I think, the change, and also not before that, in perhaps late '99. That was when Les Edgar departed as well, and he was one of the co-founders of Bullfrog with Peter. I think, as is common with these companies when they're acquired, they often secure the original founders on a contract and then they stay for a few years. Peter had obviously decided to move on, but Les had stayed on because he'd even said to a few people that he'd seen that EA were increasing their control over Bullfrog, and it was a clash of cultures a little bit. And I think what Les wanted to do is stay on board and handle that transition and help people adapt a little bit. So he stayed on really to a point and said, I can't take this any further, guys. I've done all I can. Time for me to move on, and the company has to evolve. And I think that was the step then to go into Chertsey. And I think with EA, they were never keen on Bullfrog taking on more than they could actually get done. Because the thing I learned when I was there is that EA did not like you missing your ship date. If you missed your ship date, then all the kind of advertising and all the stuff that was geared up to support that launch was lost. And it was very hard to get that budget back. So Bullfrog and Molyneux did have this reputation of, you'll get it when it's ready, or if it was not quite half finished. But that didn't really sit well with EA, I think, certainly as time moved on and we were approaching PlayStation 2 as well. The games were getting more complex, budgets were getting higher as well, so it was turned to quite a significant investment. It's like, well, we're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to change everything now because the quality bar's going up. We can't just continue as we were before.
And I guess they had more say on choice of games that were actually coming out then. Like, it would be more in EA's favour or EA's view than maybe Bullfrog's.
Yeah, so what happened is, there's the infamous Dungeon Keeper 3, where that was one of the famous ones that never saw the light of day, because there was on the disc there was a teaser, there was like a little mini trailer, because the game ends, spoiler alert, with the Reaper going through the portal and essentially going above ground. That was the gimmick, and the trailer was really some half-finished FMV offcuts that we had, and just put a blue sky in the background and a bit of cloud and whatever, and then just render it out as a quick 10-second teaser, if that, and that was it. That's all we had. There was nothing else. So I don't want to kind of spoil anybody's thoughts there if they thought there was a whole big project underway, because there wasn't. There was a big push to get DK2 out the door, and it was quite a big effort to get that whole game done, because it was massive, really far bigger than the first one. And then eventually when we moved to Chertsey and got a bit more settled in, there was a team that had started looking at it tentatively as like, well, what would a DK3 look like? And this is very, very early days. And I know there was some stuff on the web about it, and like there was a whole team working on it, and they were looking at the engine, but I don't ever recall it ever getting that far. And I think in the end, it was nipped in the bud, because I think really with the tone that EA were going down at that time, and with certain personnel in certain positions at the exec level, a game like that was never really going to get the green light. It just didn't really kind of sit well with their brand. So I think it was just like, look, guys, let's not set ourselves up for a massive disappointment. Let's just, pause it now, put it on the shelf, and then maybe we'll get a chance to go back to it another time. And the same thing happened with Syndicate as well, because there were plans to do a next-gen reboot of Syndicate as well.
This was after Syndicate Wars?
Yes. Yeah, way after Syndicate Wars. So I think Mike Mann was the lead artist of Syndicate Wars. He was on DK2 as well, and I think he was still at the studio when we moved to Chertsey, if memory serves. And he'd started some early work on a new Syndicate. There was a whole load of concept work being done for it as well. The very early design stages, very, very early design stages. So there was no actual coding or starting to really kind of flesh anything out. And again, I think in the end they just said, look, let's just knock this on the head, because it's never going to get the green light. And it was a shame. I think it would have. I mean, a new Syndicate game being made for PS2 could have been incredible, and I think with all the people they had at the time in the studio, could have been, you know, an incredible game. But there just wasn't the appetite for it, and I think there were certain people who led the studio at the time, saw that and quickly said, look, I want to do it, but I know that if I took this to the execs, it would just get shot down. So let's just not do that, really. You know, which is a real shame, really. But I think that was just the way EA was at the time.
Well, Graham, it's been fantastic talking to you, and I'd love to know what you're up to nowadays, and if you're using any of your old skills that you learnt, like motion capture and 3D rendering nowadays.
I was at EA for 6-7 years, I think. I'd worked on a lot of titles. I worked on F1. I worked on Shocks. This really cool arcade rally game, which you should check out on PS2. It's a wicked game. I did a few other titles as well. Kind of super bikes and some other stuff. And then eventually I left in 2004 and I went into film visual effects at the time. So I went to work for MPC in London, where I worked on Troy, Kingdom of Heaven, Charlie and Chocolate Factory. And that was that was where my mocap work really stood me in good stead, really. So that was where I used those skills quite a way. I only did a couple of years there because then the Chancellor at the time, I think it was Gordon Brown, he killed all the tax breaks and then all the work dried up. So I went back into games for a while, a brief spell at Codemasters and then Climax. And then I joined a company called Softimage to do as a technical specialist. And then eventually they got acquired by Autodesk, and I was at Autodesk until 2015. And then I'm back at MPC now as the marketing manager for the R&D department now. So I'm kind of helping to promote the R&D capability and software that we use to basically create all the effects that you see right now. And the last titles we've just done, so we're responsible for doing Lion King last year, for example. So that was a big project. So there was quite a significant software development to complete that movie, and of course that helps us really do all the really effects that you kind of see on screen right now. And it's a huge undertaking, and it is part of the offering that we offer to our clients as well.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for talking to us.
No, you're very, very welcome. Thank you for having me.